I would like to introduce the breakout session speaker, Ms. Chelsea McElwee. Ms. Chelsea is the president of the Zapata King Neighborhood Council. Aside from her presidency volunteer position, she is the prevention program director at Avalon Carver Community Center, which is located in the boundaries of the Zapata King Neighborhood Council. Ms. McElwee is very involved in the Community District 9, from communicating with residents on a daily basis, like youth and adults, to attending a variety of community meetings and events around South Los Angeles. Avalon Carver Prevention Program provides youth with a positive outlook in life by building their self-esteem, self-identity, leadership skills, and drug awareness, along with academic assistance. Ms. McElwee earned her master's degree in health psychology from California State University, Dominguez Hills. As she continues her journey of community involvement, her true passion is to positively empower youth in South Los Angeles and be able to help others in the community that she considers her home by giving back. So at this time, please give your attention and all the love to your speaker for today, Ms. Chelsea McElwee.
Thank you, Anthony. So we're going to go ahead and, before I introduce the topic for the presentation, I just want you all to note some of the things that COVID-19 exposed us to as stressors for this whole year and a half. If you just name some stuff in the chat, we'll spend 1 minute. It could be one word. Okay, so journeys and anxiety. And there's also said loneliness. So on top of that, it also exposed us to some of our family members and ourselves, if you were a part-time worker as a youth, job losses, social isolation, structural learning, interruption in our school-based services. If you were in extracurricular activities, you weren't able to participate in them as you would without COVID. You may have experienced a loss of a loved one. We have food insecurity. There was illnesses within our families, financial stress. So being in this pandemic for almost a year and a half has left us very vulnerable and naked because, you know, everything was virtually. We didn't have no type of privacy. So COVID-19 really did expose us to a lot of the stressors that sometimes, you know, it was easier to hide without this. So welcome to Coping with Stress with SUD, Substance Use Disorder. As Anthony mentioned, my name is Chelsea. So just a quick overview of what will be discussed during this presentation is I'll talk about what is stress, what are some of the characteristics of stress, stress in our peers, some of the ways that we cope with stress. I'll provide some examples of how you can cope with stress, and I'll end with a word, and we'll have Q&A if there's any questions. But throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box, or if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can do so. So let's start off and talk about what is stress. What's one word that you would, how would you describe Steph? I know we talked about how COVID-19 exposed us to anxiety, loneliness, as Journey and Ernesto mentioned in the chat. And we talked about some of the stressors, but how do you identify stress when you're stressed? Okay. So with anger, right, an uneasy feeling. So when we're feeling stressed, it is a emotional feeling. It's some type of tension that we have physically. That is our way for our body to really react to. We may be experiencing a challenge or a certain demand or a pressure or a threat. When we're going through that feeling, our body is releasing hormones called adrenaline, which affects our nervous system, and it causes us to have some type of physical reaction. And some of those are maybe our heartbeat. Our palms are getting sweaty, our knees are getting shaky, or you feel that anxiousness. And you can tell when your body is put into that situation, it changes. You're not yourself anymore. And that is also known as the fight and flight response, which is preparing our body to deal with whatever pressure or threat that we're getting put into. So when we talk about stress, there's two types. There's acute and chronic. Acute is something that is, it doesn't last as long. It's something that you feel for a moment and it goes away, probably in the next hour, next day, etc. Like for example, as a student, when you're taking a test, you may feel anxiety, you may feel this pressure, like, oh my gosh, I need to do well, or whatever the case may be. Or if you're giving a class presentation, you might feel that same anxiety that causes you to feel that you're under pressure. Or if you play sports, or if you're about to perform a performance. But then the opposite side of acute stress is chronic, which is more, has a long-term effect. For example, if you have in a household of two parents and they're married and they're going through divorce, that can be a long-time stressor. Or if you're moving into a new neighborhood and you know nothing about that neighborhood, that can be a long-time stressor. Maybe you're experiencing abuse. If we go back to our conversation from yesterday's session, there was a big conversation about abuse, and that can be a long-term stressor, which can be identified as chronic. Or if you're experiencing bullying, that is also considered chronic stress. But with stress, there's a positive and negative stress. You can have positive and negative stress, and I'll talk about some of the characteristics of those stress. So positive stress, it really motivates you, and your energy is focused on whatever is motivating. It's also short term. It's perceived as within our coping abilities. So you're using that energy to cope with whatever you're trying to achieve. It's exciting. It improves your performance. But on the other hand, negative, it causes that anxiety that we talked about earlier. It can either be short-term or long-term. It really depends on what the situation is, what the demand is, what threat is being perceived at that moment. And it's outside of our coping abilities. Sometimes it's so bad that, we don't know how to cope with it. Because of that tension that we have physically and psychologically. You don't feel good. Is that uneasy feeling that we also mentioned in the chat. It decreases your performance. Sometimes you may not want to go to school. You may not want to go to work. All you want to do is sleep in. So, it messes with your daily routine. And it can also lead to mental and physical problems. Sometimes when we're so stressed and we have that chronic stress that's been there so long term, it could potentially lead to depression because it's just so much pressure that we're going through. So those are some of the characteristics of positive and negative stress. And I add this little meme: if stress burned calories, I'd be a supermodel. And that's just to say that as human beings, either you're a youth or an adult, we're always stressed about something, whether or not it's positive or negative. But that stress if I can burn calories off stress, I would be a supermodel. I wouldn't, I would be able to lose weight just by being stressed, because we're always going through something. And as I mentioned, whether it's positive or negative, you always feel some type of anxiety, as we just described. So just like adults, you go through stress as well. And we shouldn't allow that to, we shouldn't take that away from them, that just because they're, you are young, you're not allowed to feel some type of anxiety or stress. So I'm going to go ahead and show a clip. It's a youth that talks about teen stress from her perspective. She's in 11th grade. Hope you all can hear.
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm a junior in high school. I love to play the violin and piano, and I'm stressed. I'm stressed about homework because I have so much homework to do every day, and every class has hours of homework. I'm also stressed about not getting enough sleep, both due to the homework I have to do and extracurriculars I do. From the school newspaper to the speech team to playing the violin in the youth symphony orchestra, it all adds stress because it all takes time. Another thing you may know we high schoolers are stressed about is having all those college applications submitted. I thought all high schoolers were just like me, stressed about all these things and not getting enough sleep. So I decided to ask them. I created an anonymous survey and I sent it out to my friends, school, and students I knew in other countries around the world. About 160 people filled it in. 160 high schoolers who I thought were just like me. After reading the responses, I realized that many of them were stressed about the same things I was. But what surprised me was how open they were about the other things that were stressing them out. The things they weren't telling other people. They weren't sharing these things with their parents, friends, therapists, or counselors. They weren't sharing these things with anyone, but they shared them with me. You know what those things were? Let me give you 4 examples. One student who's gay shared that they didn't want to tell their friends and family that they were gay because they were afraid that their friends and family would leave them and move on. Another student who's transgender shared that they've already told their parents they want to have surgery done to change their gender, that they were suicidal. But their parents didn't want them to have the surgery. They didn't approve. And to that student, they didn't seem to care that they were suicidal. The impact? They have attempted suicide 3 times. 3 times. They used my survey to talk about it, to reach out and share with me, because they didn't feel that they were being listened to. Another response I read was from a student who's been hurting themselves. A student around my age who has been harming themselves since 6th grade. That is for 5 or 6 years, of which they haven't told anyone, not a single person. Now, the last response I would like to share with you all today has impacted me in a big way. What this person shared had me asking, how can I help? How can I reach out to them? Now, this person had so much stress, so much. Now, I'd love to share with you what they wrote, but I care about them too much. What hit me, though, was that they had actually set a date as to when they were going to commit suicide. I was at home reading their words on the screen, and I was upset. And then I saw the date. It was only a week away. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to possibly lose another person at my school or in this world. And to think that they had actually set a date and told me. To this student, I have a message for you. Wherever you are, I see you, and I care about you. And all those students who took my survey, and even to those who didn't, I see you and care about you too. Now, after this experience, I found out that many of the students who took my survey were more willing to share with their peers than with their parents, therapists, or counselors, the ones that actually have the degrees to help them. There is so much more young people are not telling and sharing with you. This experience has taught me that this is only the beginning of the conversation. My hope is that together we can do something about this. Thank you.
So I hope you all enjoy that clip. And as I mentioned, this was a teen sharing her perspective of teen stress. And the reason why I added this is to show that just like adults, teens go through stuff. And sometimes they don't feel comfortable enough to share with an adult that may criticize them, or they may feel judged based off whatever they may be telling them, or disregard their feelings. Some other stress that peers may experience is school demands, frustrations within school, negative thoughts, and feelings about themselves. And then, that has to do with self-esteem, changes in their bodies, problems with friends and peers at school, even outside of school, because some of their peers may not even go to their school. Living in an environment and a neighborhood that they consider unsafe, separation or divorce of parents, or even just living in a single parent household. I remember when I was younger, I used to always go to my father's house, and he was married, and I lived with my mom, but just seeing how he interacted with his kids, and then having to go home to just being my mom, it caused the stress for me, because I wanted that. I wanted how he interacted with his kids, and he had his wife there. That's the stress that sometimes a lot of parents don't think about. Chronic illness or severe problems in the family, death of a loved one, moving or changing schools, taking on too many activities, or having too high expectations from yourself, that can also cause a stress. Because if you don't meet that expectation, you feel some type of way. And that feeling that you feel is stress. Family financial problems. So these are all sources of different types of stress. But just as these sound negative, some of these can be considered positive. Like, for example, changes in our bodies. Sometimes we may feel that we're overweight, or the doctor may consider you obese. That will motivate you to want to lose weight. Or people talking about you, that will motivate you to want to lose weight, and that will consider it positive. If you're living in an unsafe environment, you may say, okay, you know what, I'm about to work and save all my money so that when I'm an adult, I can go ahead and move out my mom's house, or whatever the case may be. So these can also be considered positive on the way that you look at it. So how to cope with stress? We throw around cope a lot, but some people really don't understand what coping really is. So when we cope, is basically a strategy allows us to deal with something that is stressful, that makes you feel positive about whatever that may be happening. And it changes your emotion around that situation, or that pressure, or that threat, or that demand that you may be experiencing. And as I mentioned earlier, adults go through stress, youth go through stress. Everyone has their ups and downs, and we shouldn't knock no one from whatever stress that they may be experiencing. It was once said that everyone knows what stress is, but no one really knows. And that's because everyone stresses differently. What you may feel as not stressful, it may be extremely stressful for someone else. So as I mentioned, we can't knock someone else's stress down. There are certain stressors that people may handle as positive stress, and it can be quickly identified as negative stress, and it can lead to someone coping poorly or taking the wrong approach of dealing with that specific stressor that they may be going through. So there's positive and coping skills and there's negative coping skills. Positive coping skills allows someone to feel some relief of stress or helps them to better deal with that stressor without negative consequences. Negative coping skills, it makes you feel immediate better, but it has the potential to create a negative consequence, which it may not happen right now, but it could happen, it will and could happen in the long run. So I'll talk about some of the positive coping skills, and I'll use that way as transitioning to give you some examples of how you can engage in those coping skills. I want to spend some time on negative coping skills, and I'll talk about some. So one negative coping skill is criticizing yourself, negative self-talk, talking about yourself, having self-doubt about your capabilities and your ability. Also driving fast in the car, if you do drive. Sometimes you may be so mad and have this built up anger that you take it off with driving too fast. Or if you have a habit of chewing your fingernails, that is a negative coping skill. Or you may become aggressive and violent, whether you're hitting or throwing or kicking something, yelling at someone, either if you're in a relationship with your girlfriend or boyfriend, your mom, your siblings. Also eating too much or too little, drug use, smoking, drinking alcohol, abusing prescription medication that may be available, and other recreational drugs. Avoiding friends and family, and risky behavior. So an example of negative coping skill that I think about in perspective is, for example, eating too much or too little. So currently I like watching the show, My 600 Pounds. And if you've seen that show, a lot of the individuals that's on the in those episodes, they talk about how they're emotionally eating, whether they experienced something at a younger age and now it's their way of coping with that experience. So as we talked about some of the negative coping skills, we talked about how it can have a negative consequence. And in 600 pounds, it's an example of how it leads to a negative consequence. So with them coping with food, it leads to an addiction. And we could think about that as well with drug and alcohol. Sometimes a lot of youth may say, oh, you know, I smoke a little marijuana because it makes me feel good at that moment. Even adults, it makes me feel good at that moment. But then when you start saying, oh, I need to smoke because I'm getting up, or I need to smoke because I'm eating, I need to eat, or whatever case it makes, you start associating that particular coping mechanism to function. And when we engage in drug and alcohol, even though this workshop is geared around SUD, substance use disorder, I didn't want that to be the sole focus because there's other addictions that can lead that can be considered negative coping mechanisms. But relating back to drug and alcohol, sometimes a lot of youth and adults use it as a form to escape stressful situations, whatever pressures they may be feeling, difficult emotions, trauma, especially when someone does not know how to cope with those feelings or situation in a healthy way. When we're engaging in a coping mechanism, say for example, if it's food or drugs or alcohol, what's happening to our brain is that it's releasing a neurotransmitter that is called dopamine. A neurotransmitter is basically chemicals that is released in our brain. Dopamine is one of those chemicals that is released in your brain, and it's only release when there's pleasure. So when we're drinking, when we're smoking, when we're eating our favorite foods, whether it's pizza or donuts, our brain is releasing dopamine. It makes us feel good. It gives us that pleasure where, you don't want to stop. You want to keep doing it because it makes you feel good. So you have an overwhelming sense of euphoria. But when we keep doing it to get that feeling of feeling good, that's what can lead to addiction. Because if you don't have it, it makes, you'll start feeling some type of craving for it. You'll start feeling some withdrawal from it. And that is a physical sign of addiction. A psychological sign of addiction is that you need those in order to not feel that stress, or you need those to not feel sad. You need whatever it is that is a negative coping mechanism to release that, to not feel that pain, or not to have that thoughts, not to have that belief about whatever may be negative or causing that stress that you may be experiencing. So engaging in negative coping skills can really lead to addiction, which is a negative consequence. And as I mentioned, you may not see it right then and there, but it will happen in a ladder. So now that we talked about some of the unhealthy coping skills, I'm going to give you some ways of some positive coping skills. Exercising, get enough sleep and have a good sleeping routine. Avoid excessive caffeine, which can also increase anxiety. I remember when I was getting Starbucks, and so if you have a Starbucks app, when you get a number of points, you can pretty much get a free drink and you can customize it to your likings. So I will always get coffee, and I would add so many shots of espresso because it was free. And coffee, Starbucks can be expensive. But when you have so much caffeine in your body, you become jittery. And that jitteriness can lead to anxiety because your body is just it's jumping at that moment. Avoid illegal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Learn relaxation or exercise. Look up YouTube videos where you can learn these exercise. Rehearse and practice situations which cause stress. For example, if public speaking is something that causes stress, take a class that allows you to allow you to learn how to engage in public speaking so that you don't feel that stress as you continue your education journey and have to speak in front of people. Learn practical coping skills. If you're that person where you have so much on your mind, or so much to do, start ahead of time. Don't wait to the last minute to do whatever you have to do. If you start ahead of time, it allows you to break that task into smaller pieces so that it's more obtainable and you're not feeling under pressure. Decrease negative self-talk. Challenge those negative thoughts and use alternative with positive thoughts. My life will get better. It can be transformed into, I may feel hopeless now, but my life will get better if I work at it and get some help. Learn to feel good about doing a competent or good enough job rather than demanding perfection from yourself and others. Sometimes we may be so goal oriented, and if we are around someone that may not be the same, that can be an example of stress. But not holding others at that same level can eliminate that stress. And if life happens, if you were in a situation and it didn't come out how you wanted to come out, it's okay. You can always try again the next day. Take a break from stressful situations, such as listening to music, talking to friends. If you have a pet, spend time with your pet. Or if you have a sibling, spend time with your sibling. Build a network of friends who help you cope in a positive way. Because we may have friends that cope in a negative way, but how is that helping us? It's not. Create artwork, painting with watercolors, coloring in a coloring book, doodling, sculpting with clay, or creating a collage. Read a book if you like reading. Play a game. Find gratitude. Remember others are struggling just as you. Remember who supports you, what makes you feel good, and be grateful. And thought hygiene. Thought hygiene. So journaling, rather than internalizing your feelings or your fears, your thoughts, put them down on paper, get them out. Writing can be a great way to release and work out any thoughts that you were struggling with. Writing was really good to me, especially in high school. Coming out wasn't as easy. So sometimes I would go through stuff and people wouldn't understand. And I want to show you my journal. It's all beat up, but I used to always write everything I was feeling. I hope you can see this. I even used to doodle on it, but you can see my composition book is all beat up. So journaling actually helped. That's my favorite way of coping. Whenever I can write, I'll write. And also identifying emotions. Sometimes we feel some way, but we don't really sit down and try to understand what are we feeling. In a word, developing strong coping skills takes time and practice. It takes time to really determine what works for you and what does not work for you. And we need to understand that coping skills will work for different people, but it's allowing ourselves to find which one works best for us. Sometimes we're quick to say, oh, that didn't work for me, but you probably only spend 5 minutes doing it. So it's really just finding what works for us and spending time and doing it on a consistent basis to make sure that it really doesn't work. And if it does, continue doing that. And the most important daily question we should ask ourselves is, what does my body, my mind, and my spirit need today? And you're the only person that can really answer that. No one knows how you're feeling and what do you need to make yourself feel good at that moment. So I hope you all learned or picked up 3 takeaways. If there's any questions, please feel free to use the chat box.
So thank you, Miss Chelsea. That was very insightful.